I like reading on my ebook reader. I prefer it to reading on a computer. However, the actual content I frequently read is most easily read on a computer. It's linked to on websites like Reddit, Hacker News, Twitter, Google+. All of these websites are most easily accessed on a computer. However, it seems to me that I should be able to get the content linked to by them on my ebook reader. That is, all of them list links in a fairly predictable way. They call them like this frequently. And those links link to content. And I should be able to get that content onto my ebook reader. I should be able to do the same thing with Hacker News, get its links. Should be able to do the same thing with links linked to me on Twitter. Not necessarily the commentary that comes with those links, but the links that people send. And I should be able to do the same thing with Google+. And there are some solutions that help achieve this, that already exist. Those are divided into two categories, feed creators and feed deliverers. Feed creators are the things that take a web page and get the links on it. Feed deliverers are the things that then take those links and get them onto your ebook reader or whatever destination you want. So first I'll talk about feed creators. How do they actually list links? They don't just list them with link, space, link, space, link, like I showed before. Because there's more information that you're interested in. You want to know the names of the articles that the links point to. You want to know the dates. Frequently you'll want to know the authors. You'll also frequently want the actual content of those articles in the file itself. And the files they create that do this are called syndication files. So here we can see an example of one. This is one created by The Economist magazine for its United States section. And for each article, it lists a title. So we can see one article is called Cuban Deals. It lists the link to that article, and it lists much of the content of those articles. This syndication file is interesting in that many syndication files list all of the content, and a few don't list any. The Economist takes an interesting middle ground where it gives you some of the content, with the idea being that you have to visit their website to see the rest. And then note that there are multiple items, multiple articles in each file. So right after this one, this is just a small snippet of a file, there'll be another article to find. And it's important to understand that these files aren't typically used in the way I'm using them. They're not used for the purpose of getting content to your ebook reader. They're frequently used with what are called feed aggregators. So here you can see the sources of content. Here you can see the actual articles. And you can choose from a wide variety of content and then frequently read it within the feed aggregator. So it's very convenient. So now I'll talk about some of the feed creators that exist. One is page to RSS. It's very simple. You just give it a link, and then it creates a list of links on the page, and it creates an RSS file. But if you notice, it gives the links as well as the comment page for the link, as well as the user page. That's because I didn't have any way of indicating which specific link locations on the page I'm interested in. So it has the author page and comment pages. These are not things I'm interested in. Because I'll get stuff like this on my ebook reader, which is important information, but it's annoying, but it's not relevant to the article. And it's annoying to get extra information on an ebook reader because when you scroll past it, you have to wait for the pages to refresh. And similarly, the comment threads, if it's a popular article, you get these comment threads that are like 250 comments long, very annoying to scroll through on an ebook reader. So you want a solution that is much more flexible. FeedYes is one that aims to also be very simple while still providing more flexibility. So I'll give it the Hacker News link, and then it filters them on headline length. One problem with FeedYes is that it doesn't allow you to get links to external websites, but that's just an extra heuristic it adds. That's not fundamental to the other things it does. So while it wouldn't work for my purposes, we can still learn from it. So if we give it to the archive of a blog, it filters them by length of the anchor text, which is this sort of text, and then it asks me to click the first one that's relevant and the last one that's relevant. That way, if there's extra stuff at the top I'm not interested in or at the bottom I'm not interested in, it can filter out those link locations.
David, is Bazcox also an example of a feed creator? I mean, it was the first example you showed.
Oh, that's a feed aggregator.
And how is that different from one of these guys?
So these create the files that are used by feed aggregators.
Okay.
So these create files that list out links and their the article names of those links. Bascox is an example. Google Reader is also an example of a feed aggregator. Takes those files and then displays the links from them.
And the content in these links don't need to come from places like The Economist that have produced syndication files?
Exactly. This creates
This
syndication
replaces-
files
I see.
out of any website. And it worked well in this case, right? So all of these are, that's the very first link was relevant. The last link is relevant. So this worked in this case, but the problem is, try it on a website like Reddit, and you get results like this, where you have Internet is Beautiful is the name of a group on that website. It's not the name of an article. So the article is all the way down here. And it is about the same length as the group names. So we cannot filter the articles by the length of the anchor text. So it does not work well on Reddit. Another example of a feed creator is feed43. And it's a bit more complicated, but it's very powerful. So I give it the URL, and I even specify the encoding of the content at that URL. And then it gets the HTML source code of that page and asks me to define, it's not as powerful as a regular expression, but it's a similar idea. Basically text that surrounds the links that I'm interested in, which is indicated here by the percent and the curly braces. And it works decently well. So I went to the Wikipedia group on Reddit, and I got the links. And then I can define another search term for the actual titles. So it works well frequently, but it's very complex. You have to look through the source code of the web page and identify a pattern that matches all of the links, link locations. And I have been unable actually to do that on, for example, Hacker News or Google+. It's just a very complex endeavor to identify because frequently small minor formatting differences in the HTML will break whatever search term you're trying to use. So this one though is very nice, Figity. It has this. The interface I ended up using is most similar to this one. I like it a lot. You just enter a URL, it pops up, and it even has a nice tutorial on how to use it that pops up. And then you just click a link, so I'll click the network is hostile. It highlights all of the links. Those are indeed the links I want. And not only that, but the ones I showed before will frequently break on Google+, because it's such a complex website, but it works on Google+. So it's very good, right? Its limitation, however, is that it works with a tag-based system. So it works, if a tag surrounds the content in the source code of the web page, it thinks that's what you want. So for example, if I clicked comments here, because I just want the comments, because all of these three elements are under the same tag, I cannot differentiate between them. And even if I go to the advanced refinement page, I still cannot. So there's some trade-offs that we've observed here, right? There's a trade-off between the flexibility of a system, that is how much power you have over the link locations that get selected, and the simplicity of the user experience. So feed43, for example, very complex to use because you have to find search terms, but very flexible frequently. Another problem is that they don't work on Google+ generally, and they also don't actually return the content of those pages, they just return links. So if you remember, syndication files can contain links, and frequently they contain the content. None of these services get the actual content. To get the content from the link, you have to use a feed deliverer. And you might have heard of some of these. Instapaper is a feed deliverer, Readability is a feed deliverer. And the relevant way they work in this case is that you you can email links to them, and they will format the content located at that link in a way that makes it easy to read on an ebook reader. Not only that, it'll send some number of those links a day in a compilation and with a table of contents. So it's extremely convenient to read through. So you see here, it'll send me a compilation if it has 5 new links every day at 10 p.m. Another set of feed deliverers work in a different way. BlogTrotter is a good example in which it just delivers whatever. It doesn't actually go and get content from the web page like Instapaper or Readability will do. Instead, it just delivers the content from the syndication file, and then it emails it to you. So here you see in my email, it sent me the link to Nuclear Pasta, but there's no content from the actual Wikipedia page. And here it shows me the content, but only because the syndication file provided this content. It was a one-line of content. So here are the takeaways from the feed deliverers. One is that if you were to combine, for example, just Feedity and BlogTrotter, it would not be sufficient for my purposes because my ebook reader would just get a file of links, right? So instead I'd have to combine it with some other system that delivers the links given to me by Feedity via email, something like Instapaper. Also, another takeaway is that when using Instapaper, I noticed is that compilations are extremely convenient. So especially when they come with a table of contents, because you just get a lot of the articles you want to read, and you can just jump to them on your ebook reader. And lastly, the takeaway is that whatever solution I make should contain output to both email and RSS, in addition to whatever compilation functionality I make. So aside from just sending a file, I should allow people to access their links via RSS or email just so that they can use it with services like Instapaper.
So you're just mentioning RSS for the first time.
Syndication files. RSS is just a specific type of syndication file. A very common type, but yeah. The file we saw earlier with The Economist was an RSS syndication file. It was RSS 2.0 specifically. So it should be available to work with RSS because BlogTrotter requires that type of input. So you can use it with other feed deliverers if you want, or you should be able to, in addition to whatever delivery functionality it offers. So what did I end up doing? Put in Infocatch. Well, if you remember, my motivations for Infocatch are that it should be simple. So Feed 43 is powerful, but it's complex to use. So it should be a simple experience for the user. They shouldn't have to look through the source code of a web page. It should be flexible, so you should be able to go to Hacker News and just get the comment sections of the articles. You should be able to create a feed that does that. And it should be able to be a one-stop solution. So if you don't want to chain together multiple services, you should be able to get a compilation of content without using another service. So here's what it looks like. You go to that URL, you get instructions, and you get a box to enter a URL into. You click Load Page, and it loads that web page like this. It has some instructions at the top. It displays a slightly different version of the web page, and I won't get into the reasons, but basically the web page with a subscribe button. Initially, the subscribe button is grayed out until you click a link. So let's click the first link. The result is that all the link locations, this link location, all of these are highlighted, and you can, if this is correct, you can click subscribe. And it will display your subscription. And and I'll get into what a subscription is later, but just note that this uniquely identifies what we just created. It's the URL, and it's the location of the links that were highlighted. That's what this is. And I will get into explaining that in a minute. Note, there's a couple bragging screenshots. It's powerful enough to select the comment sections, and it works on Google+. So if we give it a Google+ page, we click a link. So I clicked that link, and then it only selected one link, right? It didn't select this link, and it didn't select that link. So what I do is the notion is you generalize the selection criteria. You want whatever is selecting those locations to select more links. So you hit the up arrow. And that a couple times, and that causes more links to be selected. On Google Plus, for reasons I'll get into in a minute, you cannot select all 3 of these links simultaneously, but that's not too much of a problem because you can always go back to the same page and create another subscription that highlights other links so that ultimately you can get all of the link locations highlighted, just spread out across multiple subscriptions. So for a Google Plus page, that typically requires 2 links, 2 subscriptions. So then we see that one is listed there. And now I'll go into more detail about how this process works. Here's how I will structure that discussion. So first I'll talk about how I actually select link locations that were highlighted and the advantages and disadvantages of the system I use. Then I'll talk.
Can you also say what happens?
Yeah.
So you've just selected all the links, and then what happens?
In terms of on Infocatch, the server?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Specifically when it creates a delivery, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, okay, so what the deliveries look like, I guess that'll...
That would make sense. No, I'll talk about that in the design section.
Okay.
That would make sense though. So how the link, so first I'll talk though about what exactly I'm doing to transform the user clicking on a link to highlighting link locations, right? Because there's multiple ways to do that, and what method do I use? So I use something that are called XPaths. If you remember the name of this thesis, it's a more powerful feed provider built on web scraping. So web scraping is using something called XPaths to get content automatically from the internet. So an XPath is an address on a web page to elements on that web page. And it can be an address to one element, or it can be an address to multiple elements. And it works through an interface called the document object model, which allows you to interact with a web browser and the content on that web browser as if it were a tree. I mean tree in the computer science sense, where you have a node, and that sprawls other nodes recursively. So each of these nodes has, so here we have a tree. Each of these nodes have children, etc., and they have methods. So you can get the parents, you can get the siblings, etc. So why do I use XPaths? For one thing, it allows you to be very specific. You can identify a specific link with an XPath if you wanted to. I actually immediately, when a user clicks a link, broaden the XPath selection immediately because it makes it more user-friendly. But if I wanted, I can make it so that it first initially just selects one link. And even though I broaden it, even though I generalize the criteria, it's still much more selective than the other means, for example, with tag-based systems, etc. And another reason I use XPaths is the whole tree structure provides you with a very intuitive means of altering which link locations are highlighted. Because by moving up the tree, you are generalizing, because you can make all the descendants be what's selected. And in that way, you can generalize the selection criteria. So I'll provide an example. So here we see the New York Times, and you see a few links highlighted. Here we see the New York Times with a few more links highlighted. So let's look at the specific differences in the XPaths between those two situations. On the left, we see the first one. On the right, we see the second one. If you notice, this has been replaced with wild characters. What this means is that instead of this being in the address, anything can be at this point in the address. So it's important to note that that's how I generalize things. I always keep the last two elements the same, because if you don't, the link selection, the location selection becomes way too general, and you start selecting just other types of elements. And I found that this works. So what are the advantages of this system? We can be very specific, so that the worst case scenario is not that we get too much content, it's that we have to create multiple subscriptions, which for my purposes is a fantastic trade-off. I'd much rather just go through the effort of creating multiple subscriptions than having to deal with going through extra content on my ebook reader. It also provides an intuitive way to generalize your selection, right? I think And you don't have to understand anything about HTML code to be familiar with the concept of making your selection more general. I think that's an intuitive understanding that people have. And the last thing is that it's also very easy for computers to understand. That is, you can go to a web browser programmatically and say, get every element of this XPath, and it can just do it. It's just very easy for the computer. There are a couple disadvantages, though. So the subscriptions created using this means are fragile. If the web page structure changes, then the address of those elements can change. And when that happens, your subscription breaks. That's just simply a downside with this approach. You can always, if you notice you've stopped getting content from that subscription, you can always delete it and create another subscription, but you have to do that. So that's just a problem with this approach. And also, sometimes multiple subscriptions are required. I'll give an example. If you have elements that are located at addresses that are of different lengths, then no amount of generalizing those addresses will select both sets of links, because you're not changing the actual length of the addresses when you generalize them.
So is XPath a node on the HTML tree, or is it more general than that?
It's an address to a node or multiple nodes.
And when you say multiple nodes, what do you mean? Just the star?
Right.
So anything on that level, or?
Yeah, exactly. So each block in between the slashes indicates a direction. So if you imagine like a Huffman tree, for example, you always went to the left on 0, to the right on 1. It's the same idea, except a star says go to both, and then continue with the address.
So it's just the top part of the address that's important in that case?
Every part that isn't replaced with a wild character.
Yeah, because you can say on your last choice, always go to the right, even though you go to both the right and left in intermediate choices.
Now, when you showed that XPath, it had numbers on it. Does that mean number 3, like the third child in that node, going from that node?
Right, exactly.
Or, so
Maybe you should show the XPath and explain what the cryptic stuff means.
because typically these things have also names, right? Head or whatever. Right?
Yeah, so basically an index like this represents which one of these in order it is. So if you do if you're doing a tree traversal, you're going to come across multiple elements called div, and this tells you to take the one at index 1. Take the div, go to div at index 1. So there's actually multiple div children.
Okay, so it's the first div in that
So
among the children of that node.
Right. Right.
Thank you.
So now I'll talk about what a delivery actually looks like. First, just to talk about the delivery options again. You can email a list of all of the links. You can email a PDF compilation, or you can not email anything because they can go to the RSS feed. I'm keeping this option because I'm about to implement it. I'll get into why I haven't in a minute. But so the user can select any of these delivery options, and they can select which email they would like the compilation to be sent to.
Do you really have David at Kindle.com?
No. I didn't want anyone looking at this presentation to be able to say, that's how we can send anything to David's Kindle without any filtering process. So here, for example, we have PDF delivered. And you'll notice that there's multiple PDFs. This is sent on the same day. And that's because they actually limit it to just 10 links of content per PDF, just because of memory issues. I was running out of memory when I was compiling too much content into a single PDF. I'm using a free host. That doesn't provision me much memory. So unless I pay them money, I have to split it into multiple PDFs. So here's an example of what one of those PDFs looks like. As a table of contents. And that's created by the PDF generation library. And we can look through it, more table of contents. It's got the actual content of the web page, it's very nice. And one downside though is it gets all the content on the web page. So if you have a long comment thread, you're going to have a long comment thread on your ebook reader. And what's worse, on a web page, you frequently have elements stacked very wide, and those elements are stacked in a manner that's wider than a sheet of paper. So what happens when you print that to PDF, you get just a long column of those elements, which is very annoying. So this isn't practical for reading on an ebook reader in this form. So that's why I haven't created a EPUB delivery system yet, because EPUB is only used with ebook readers, essentially. So before I create EPUB format, what I'm going to want to do is create some sort of formatter that just gets that removes all of this sort of clutter. It just gets the content you're interested in. This is what Instapaper does. This is what readability does.
So just to be clear, this is all clutter in a single link that you had chosen in your subscription.
Exactly. Exactly. This is all a web page. This is this web page. It's on the Linode blog. And because it has all these comments and navigation links, that all goes into the PDF.
And for some reason, this link didn't have comments separated from the article, whereas some do.
Right, right, exactly. So when I was talking about the comments section earlier on Hacker News is a website people post links to, and then there's another section on that website with a comment thread on each of those links. This comment thread right here is the comment thread on the actual website. So this is not the Hacker News comment thread. This is the comment thread that is under the article on the website. And this is a problem, right? This is bad for an ebook reader. And this is why this is not the mechanism I use when I use the service. I use individual links that send links to Instapaper, which formats it nicely. You can also do this where you just get the links emailed to you. I figured I should allow users to get that get the links that way in case they just want it. I don't use this option myself, but if you want to get your links sent by email, it's convenient. And the other option is you just send the links individually, so it allows you to get them on Instapaper, and then Instapaper can then package it for you. Lastly, you can access the RSS feed for your links at infocatch.herokuapp.com/RSS/your username, and you can view the feed that way. So now I'll talk about the design of Infocatch. It uses Model View Controller, and I'll explain what that means in the context of the Django web framework, which is a Python framework for making web services with. So the user sends in input, they interact with the view somehow that sends a post. And this post gets handled by, and this is the controller of the Model View Controller pattern, despite the name view. I'll get to that in a moment. So it sends a post to the controller, which then determines what to do with that post. It might just interact immediately with the model, which interacts with the database automatically. In Django, you don't have to interact with the database manually. It abstracts you away from that process. By interacting with the model, you interact with the database. Or it can send information from the controller to the view, which then creates HTML, which is displayed to the user. So why is this called a view? It's because it determines what information is sent to the view. That's the Django project's reasoning. So it makes things a little bit confused that part of the controller is called the view, but this is actually a controller. It doesn't have display information associated with it. That all happens in the template. So here is how the models, here are the models Infocatch uses. So earlier I talked about subscriptions, and here we see what that actually is. Subscription is just a string that goes to a URL, and a string of an address of link locations at that URL, and that's all a subscription is. This model is then composed in another model called subscription links, which has a single subscription. It has a list of links, and it has a date field. The purpose of this model is to track the links linked to by a subscription on a given day. This model allows you to just once a day ask a website what links it has at a given XPath and then store that result. Because users can have, if multiple users have a single subscription, you don't want to go to that page and scrape the links off of it multiple times. Instead, the first time you save the links to a subscription links model and update the date, and then the second time you check, you see that that day's links have already been gotten, so you can just get them. No more web scraping required. Django provides a user model, and I use this model along with the subscription model to create a subscription user pairing. What this does is it allows me to say which users are subscribed to which subscriptions. That way I don't have to store subscriptions redundantly in the database. I just store their pairing information. And there's also a user settings model, which just allows me to say what email I should send stuff to and in what format. These two should be the same model. That's something I should change in the future. It would be simpler. There's a one-to-one relationship between them. You might as well think of them as being the same model. I didn't make them the same model because there's some intricacies involved with overriding a default model defined by the Django project, because that model is used by other parts of the project, and so I just haven't gotten around to that yet. You can think of it that way. For all intents and purposes, it is that way, but technically, they're separate models. So the advantage of the system is, again, you just check a subscription once a day, not once a day per user. Here's the actual layout of the model view controller views. So at the very top, we have a base template, which has the navigation bar we saw earlier, where you can go to user settings, RSS feed, home view. That's what that's where that navigation bar comes from. And it has a notion of content. And then other views extend that view. So the home view replaces content, and the user settings template replaces content. And so the home template gets the actual content to display from the home view, which consists of a URL form that is just a notion of a collection of a string that the user can enter, and a user subscription pairing that allows you to create a list of links that can be deleted. So it gives all of that information to the home template, which then gets those forms and converts them to HTML, and then passes that along to the content string on the base template. User settings template is somewhat similar. So we have the view, which is a controller. If you remember, the Django view is a controller. And what it does is it tells the user settings model, I want a form created from this model. I don't even actually make this form myself. I mostly just tell Django that I want the form to exist. And then I tell the controller how to determine which user settings model to create the form for. And I tell them that the user has to be logged in to access that form. And then it creates that form, and that form is converted into HTML, which goes to the content string. And I have two views that do not have anything to do with the base template. One is the subscribe template, which does not follow the model view controller pattern, and I get into why in my thesis. But it basically just takes the HTML header and the HTML body and embeds the click behavior, JavaScript, and information in between it. And also, this controller can receive, when the user clicks save, that sends a post to this controller, which saves the actual subscription. And over here, the RSS feed also doesn't use the template, because there's no view information. I don't really care about what it looks like, because it's read by feed aggregators and other programs. Users don't typically scroll through a syndication file, which is what this displays. They view that information in a manner that's formatted by something like Google Reader or Fastcops. So the way it's created is this controller gets the subscription links for each of that user's subscriptions, and it gets the title and description of each of those, and uses the library to create an RSS feed and then just straight passes that to the template. Here's, I thought I should talk a little bit about the actual delivery process, which is what that looks like at a high level. And basically it just says for every user, for all of their subscriptions, for every user define a list of links, and then for each of the subscriptions that user is subscribed to, if that subscription has already had its links scraped, add that list to the user links. If it hasn't, open a web browser, get the links at that location, and then add it to the user's list of links. And then now you have a list of that user's links for that day. So you just have to check your settings and deliver it in the manner prescribed by their settings. So you can create a PDF from those links and email it. You can space delineate them and email it, or you can email them all individually.
And where does this process live?
It lives in a directory called get feeds. And it's run once a day. I just tell Heroku, run this function. There's just a function that does this. And I just tell Heroku to just run this function once a day. So now I'll just talk briefly about things I have to do to improve Infocatch for the future. So for one, currently I'm using Instapaper to get my links delivered to me, but I'd rather just create a file that I can send to my ebook reader myself and format it to be nice within ebook reader, because there are various limitations that come with Instapaper. It can only send you so many links, etc. So it'd be nicer just to have a one-stop solution also.
I was confused about the distinction between EPUB and PDF. Do they both suffer from the same problem of having extra stuff from the web page?
Yeah. So the PDF I create suffers from that problem as well. I created the PDF first, saw that result, and that's when I decided to just move on. Email verification. So right now you can just tell Infocatch to email your output to anyone. It doesn't verify that email is your email. It only sends those emails once a day, so that's not too big a deal, because most email clients, even if you send all the links individually, it'll combine them into a single thread, so it's not that annoying. Still a problem, should still verify the emails. Also, should allow users to create their own accounts on Infocatch. Currently, I just have people log in via Facebook, Twitter, or Google, but there's a privacy problem there where maybe people don't want me to know what social accounts they're associated with, and maybe they just don't have accounts with those services. So it should allow people to create an account on Infocatch. It should allow people to name their subscriptions they create, because right now they see a URL and an XPath that uniquely identifies their subscription. It's hard to remember which XPath. If you have multiple subscriptions to a single web page URL, it's hard to remember which links each XPath refers to. And it's also just not very user-friendly. If people aren't familiar with XPaths, if you just see all these weird characters, it's not a nice user experience. And lastly, on Google Plus earlier, there's a UI bug where it doesn't display the instructions and subscribe button. The functionality still works. You can still create a subscription by clicking a link, generalizing it, and then hitting the right arrow. But it's not, it doesn't work perfectly. It doesn't display the instructions button. So now we'll talk about the historical context of Infocatch. So the question you kind of want to answer is, why doesn't every website just make syndication files? And the answer to that is they want control over their content. So it's not an issue really of laziness. It's actually very easy to create a syndication file. There's lots of libraries that do it for you at this point. It's a pretty, the reason Facebook and Twitter don't create these files isn't because they haven't gotten around to it, right? So they specifically want control over, for example, how their content is displayed. So they force users to get their content through APIs, and then because of that, they can tell people if you use the Twitter API, you have to display each tweet with this information, for example. So it's very reasonable. They want to, for quality assurance purposes, etc., they want to ensure that their content is used in certain ways. They still make their websites scrapable because they want search engines to be able to index them, but they don't make it easy for users to just get their content and use it in a way that they don't control. So it's mainly social media that don't create these syndication files. Other websites, blogs, etc., they typically use something like WordPress, which will create the syndication file for you. So I'll talk about the history of push technology with respect to news delivery, because all the things I've talked about so far, syndication files, slash feed aggregators, and social media are all examples of push technology, which is technology that creates the illusion of just content being sent to you. So it's what allows for a passive model of, for example, watching television is an example of push technology. Content, TV shows are just sent to you. You go to a channel and you see a show. Pull technology, that's in contrast to pull technology, which is like going to Google and searching something. So I'll talk about push technology with respect to the delivery of news. So here's how this will be structured. First, I'll talk about some of the services that came about in the 1990s that were based on the sort of television model. Then I'll talk about feed aggregators slash RSS. Then I'll talk about how the use of those aggregators declined and social media rose. So first I'll talk about these television model-esque services. And note, so I'll read this quote. Ever since the internet burst into prominence a few years ago, it has been a medium in search of a viable business model. It has found one, television. Driven by advertisers' need for a predictable, quantifiable audience, the web is being inverted. Web surfers who sift through oceans of data to pull what they want are given way to web viewers, who have highly customized information pushed directly to their PCs. As the push trend takes hold, the now familiar web browser is likely to be replaced by a channel selector. This is not a techno-utopian article published in Wired magazine, for example. This is the Wall Street Journal. This is very mainstream, at the time, notion that at the end of 1996, that the web browser was going to be replaced by a sort of television-esque presentation of web content. So a service that many people were excited about, for example, is Pointcast, which its primary service was that when your computer went idle, it would display information to you along with an advertisement, and you could click that information and had pre-downloaded that content already. You can also just bring up this page by clicking a button, even if your computer wasn't idle. So there were a couple advantages to this. It allowed you to view content very passively. So it's like watching television. At the time that this was created, search engines weren't as good as they are now, so it was harder to find content. So there was something appealing about the notion of just having it sent to you. Also, internet speeds were slow. This is 1996, 1997. So because it downloaded all the content in advance when you were away from your computer, you could just open it up instantly. And what that allowed you to do is also just, they believe this would also allow you to view just a completely different type of content that required more information. So you could view, for example, more images, etc. And it was actually, Pointcast generated so much bandwidth that companies banned it from their networks. Because while it was idle, it would download all this content, and it was just using too much. And Pointcast also, they didn't have any lack of people that wanted to make deals with them to create a channel on their network. Microsoft packaged Pointcast software on their computers, and MSNBC created a Pointcast channel, as in CNN, Chicago Tribune, Boston Globe, Los Angeles Times, and Pathfinder. So all of these providers created channels that you could view content from. And they were offered, according to many news sources that cite anonymous people, but The Economist, for example, just states this like a fact. They were offered $450 million by News Corp to buy them in January 1997. So that's a demonstration of how much confidence people had in this being the future of how people would view internet content and how it would impact the news industry. And what demonstrates that even more is that they turned the offer down. They were offered $450 million and they turned it down. Later, they sold for $7 million in May 1999, and they basically shut down the service. So, in about 2.5 years, they shut down the Pointcast network, and it was not viewed as it was not getting enough use to continue justifying operating it. So, there's a similar product called Microsoft Active Channels, which had two features. There was one that allowed you to embed internet content in the desktop, although this used a lot of memory. And there was another that had a similar channel functionality where you could go, for example, to Disney or etc. and it would display content from their channels. At the time, Microsoft and Netscape were neck and neck in competing with each other. That time period is kind of defined by the opposition between those two companies. So Netscape created its own service. And what it did was you would tell it a URL and a recursion depth. It would go to that link, then download the content from all of the links on that page, etc., until it hit the depth. That way, you could then click through those links very quickly. So, Netcaster also did not have trouble getting content providers to sign up. What this quote basically says is, our beta prototype was terrible and buggy, but many 30 to 40 companies signed up anyway to create channels. And these were the biggest media companies in the world: Time Warner, Disney, CNN, etc. And it was removed from Netscape browser in a year. Note that it didn't even have to generate money. Unlike Pointcast, this was just a feature in the Netscape browser. So the Netscape browser wasn't the way Netscape made money. Instead, it was a way that Netscape increased its market presence with the hope that it could then use that presence to sell servers more easily. So this didn't even have to directly make money, and it still was discontinued, which to me indicates that it just wasn't getting much use. And frequently when you look at why did all these services fail, it's tempting to say, well, Netcaster was buggy, but all of them failed, right? So it seems unlikely that every single service fails because of circumstances specific to that product. Instead, you start to suspect that there's reasons common to all of them that's behind their failure. And I think it's that people don't like the television model. So people like having content sent to them, but they like having more control over what content is sent to them, which needs to provide for two reasons. One, it's entirely possible that there just wasn't enough blogs and stuff, blogs and other sources of internet links on the internet at the time. So in my thesis, the way I approximate the number of independent blogs is I just use the availability of blogging software, which there was not much available when these were produced, but by 1999 there were plenty. So it's possible that that's part of it. And also these services just commonly didn't display a large number of links at once. They frequently just displayed a couple of links, which does not allow the user to really just click the ones that interest them from a wide selection. So it results in a much less customized experience. Which feed aggregators provide? Feed aggregators provide that experience, and I think that's why they largely replaced those services. So I'm going to talk about RSS, which is the most, it was essentially the first successful and it's the most prominent format for syndication files, which are again the files used by feed aggregators. And it has two ancestors, the scripting news format and the RDF site summary. This is the scripting news format. All of this just displays this. It was created by Dave Weiner, just a single person, just because he wanted to find a use for XML. He wanted to use it in a way that would syndicate his blog's content. It's actually a very interesting format. If you look, it has you define essentially links in the structure itself without using HTML. So for example, we see strange picture here, and that's the link there, given the URL there. It's interesting, but it's very specific. It's a very specific use case. It's made for blog posts. That's in contrast to the RDF site summary. RDF is a meta information format, which allows you to specify relationships using subject, predicate, and objects. So you can say, John Smith plays cricket. So this can be used for a lot of purposes. They were going to create a format made to apply the RDF format to websites, and that was originally what RSS was, the RDF site summary. So RSS 0.9, that was the original intent. However, they quickly removed that, which I'll get to in a second. But for example, a use case of RDF on websites could be, if you are visiting this website, you might be interested in this website because we've noticed that they share certain qualities. So, according to the RSS 0.91 specification, it was originally designed to use RDF and be a metadata format. However, it became clear, two things became clear. The first is that providers want more of a syndication format than a metadata format. The structure of an RDF file is very precise. It must conform to the RDF data model in order to be valid. It is not easily human understandable and can make it difficult to create useful RDF files. The second is that few tools existed at the time for RDF generation, validation, and processing. For those reasons, they just switched it to using XML, which I won't really get into, but RSS uses it as well. It's just a way of creating file formats that's simple and creates them in a tree-like structure. So RSS was used initially by the Netscape portal, which you could customize by logging in and specifying your news sources. And then Userland, which is the company owned by Dave Weiner, who created the scripting news format, also created a portal like that, and various other services that then did, and RSS became popular. However, AOL bought Netscape, and once they did so, Netscape stopped maintaining the RSS format. It was no longer a priority for the company. The people that had worked on it either quit Netscape or switched to other projects. As a result, they actually deleted what's called the document type definition, which defined the format and was relied upon by various validators. And as a result, various services broke. The purpose of pointing this out just to demonstrate how little they cared about the format at that point. And because Netscape was no longer managing the RSS format, it split into multiple formats. Over the original disagreement over what the purpose of RSS should be. Should it be a metadata format that uses RDF to structure metadata about websites, or should it be a very specific syndication format that just lists links, article names, and dates, which is the way people were using it mostly. So Mark Pilgrim is someone that actually had to write validators and parsers for RSS, and at one point they just complained about how many different versions there were of RSS after this fork. So there are 9 versions of RSS, all of which are incompatible with various other versions. RSS 0.9 is incompatible with Netscape 0.91. Netscape's 0.91 is incompatible with Userland's 0.91. Netscape's 0.91 is incompatible with 1.0, which is the RDF, the new RDF model. Userland's RSS 0.91 is incompatible with 0.92, which was created in response to the 1.0 model, to the 1.0 format, as a way of saying no, it's actually still a syndication format. And 0.92 is incompatible with 0.93, which is incompatible with 0.94, which is incompatible with 2.0. 2.0 was originally an attempt to merge 1.0 with the other ones. It was an attempt to merge the RDF model with the syndication model, but they couldn't agree. So Dave Weiner actually just ended up creating 2.0 without the metadata format. So it was just yet another one. And then RSS 2.0 evolved again so that there was multiple versions of 2.0. So all of these had many the same basic ideas of links on a web page, but the various advanced features or some of the specifics of how that information was labeled were incompatible with each other. So someone creating a service that could understand RSS files had to worry about each of these different versions. This problem was ameliorated somewhat after about 3 or 4 years when Userland Software donated the RSS 2.0 specification to the Harvard Berkman Center for Law and Society, or the Internet Society. So Userland Software is again the company that's owned by Dave Weiner. And what this did is it indicated to people that Userland Software cannot abuse their power over the specification to hurt competitors who were relying on it. So now I'm just going to talk about some statistics about RSS usage. So in one survey, 12% of people in 2005, 12% of people had heard of it, 4% knew that they used it, and 27% of people used it. So various services use RSS, like the Yahoo, for example, portal uses RSS, and you can even input RSS links into it. but many people aren't aware of that. In 2007, 9% said they used it, 11% 2008, and 8% 2009. This statistic isn't intended to demonstrate a trend, just intended to demonstrate approximately the amount of market share RSS had. So now I'm going to talk about the decline of aggregators and the rise of social media. So I'll demonstrate that aggregators declined in usage. First, I'll show that just the people searching for RSS decreased from around 2006 drastically. So this is specifically Google searches. And we can see that that was not replaced by newer syndication file formats or technologies like Atom and PubSub. And we can also see that over the same time, Facebook really exploded. Next, I'll talk about actual referrals to TechCrunch. So TechCrunch published an article where they looked at referrals from different sources between 2009 and 2010. And Google Reader, which was the largest feed aggregator at the time online, went from the 11th greatest referrer, from the 6th greatest to the 11th greatest, and which was a 50% decline in the number of referrals to TechCrunch, where a referral is someone going to TechCrunch from the service. In the same time period, Twitter went from 3rd to 1st by doubling, and Facebook went from 5th to 2nd, again by doubling. Another way we can look at the decline of feed aggregators is just look at them closing and see what they say when they close. So Bloglines was one, before Google Reader, it was the biggest, and they basically explicitly cited social media as the reason for their loss of users. We can also see over time, this graph shows actually stagnant between 2009 and 2010 referrals from Google Reader, while referrals from Facebook increased. However, this graph is somewhat questionable because in the same time period, Google says that its usage increased. Google claims that its use hadn't decreased yet. So that's somewhat questionable. I thought it was interesting that those two graphs disagree with each other. This graph is probably more trustable because it's coming from Google, as opposed to just judging referrals. This graph is of use of Google Reader, the number of articles read by them. However, even Google Reader eventually shut down, and when they did, they cited not enough users. So, and that was the largest online feed aggregator, which demonstrates just how much that declined. So why is it that social media displaced feed aggregators and then surpassed where they had ever been? There's 3 reasons. 1, they offer social discovery features. 2, they merge presentation of news streams with other functionality. And 3, they're centralized. So social discovery feature, for example, on Twitter, I have no idea who Darshan is, but I know that Paul Graham retweeted this link that they sent. And as a result, if I'm curious about the source of that link, or if I liked that link's content, I can then go to Darshan's profile and see what other links he's located. Maybe I want to follow him in the same way I follow Paul Graham. So Twitter also provides other social discovery functionality. For one thing, it tells me who's following him, so I know Chris Dixon follows him. And also, though, it tells me who follows him and who he follows and who his followers are. That is, whose streams he is subscribed to and who subscribes to him. I can then look through these lists and find, well, if this guy who posts links that I think are interesting thinks that these people are interesting, then maybe I should check them out. So as a result, by looking at the sources of the content that you find interesting, you can find new sources of content. This is a very compelling feature of various social media websites. Facebook has it too. They all have it. Google Reader actually had this functionality for a bit before the introduction of Google+, in which case after which most of that functionality was removed. However, Google Reader did not have the second piece of functionality, which is that social media merges the information stream with other functionality. So this is the story of how I joined Facebook. I wasn't a member of Facebook until last year, when I wanted to go to the meetup of a Harry Potter fanfiction group event. So to sign up for this event, I had to get a Facebook account. I signed up for Facebook, and ever since, what do? Almost daily, I read through my wall and read through the information stream. This is, I think, a common phenomenon where people join Facebook for reasons like it's easy to keep track of your friends, to find out what their phone numbers are, etc. But then what do you do 90% of the time? You actually look through the information stream that is similar functionality to what a feed aggregator provides. Social media didn't invent this tactic. For example, Yahoo's portal also does it. So if you want to check your email, you'll first see the Yahoo page, which lists various stories that you can personalize. So Yahoo actually provides a feed aggregator. But Yahoo doesn't provide social discovery features, for example. And the last reason I think social media has displaced feed aggregators is that they're centralized. And this general theory is, in this trend is what I'd argue is an instance of a larger theory proposed by Tim Wu, which is that over time information networks become centralized because centralization implies various efficiencies that make those networks more powerful. So there's a natural trend to become a monopoly or an oligopoly, where you just have a few at the top. And he points to examples of how this happened in movies, where they were actually, there was a time when the movie industry was vertically integrated. So the people that made the movies were the same people that owned the movie theaters, for example. And that was true until it was broken up by the government. This happened with the telephone companies, and it's happened with the radio. And his argument is that this happens until eventually they start to protect their business models. They use their power to suppress new innovations, and as a result, they start to decline, which results either in them crumbling as a result of outside competition or by direct government action. So, what are the efficiencies of centralization that are relevant here? One is that it limits internal division for a given service. It limits how that service can be disrupted by other services, and it allows people to create more user-friendly services. So what do I mean by limits internal division? Well, again, RSS, after it was shut down, it split. After Netscape stopped managing RSS directly, RSS didn't die, right? The fact that RSS was just a format, not a service, allowed it to continue existing. However, its existence was plagued by this internal division between people that wanted it to be a metadata model and much more restricted syndication model. So as a result, you get these non-incompatible formats. The result of this is that you get fewer services developed. Because when you're a programmer and you have to think, well, okay, I'm going to make a service that uses RSS, but oh, I have to do this, and I have to do this, and I have to do this, all these different formats, it's harder. It increases the difficulty of creating more services that use RSS. And this argument isn't that RSS usage declined as a result of the fork. It's that it never grew to what it could have been. We already had social media sites by 2003 that provided functionality that was roughly equivalent to feed aggregators. So people that might have used feed aggregators, if those services had been available, instead ended up using social media. Also, so how can we characterize decentralization with respect to RSS? It helped RSS survive, but it hurt feed aggregators in general. So RSS survived because it wasn't a service. If Netcaster, provided by Netscape, when it was shut down, it was done. That service no longer existed. No one else could recreate Netcaster specifically. They would instead have to create new alternative services. That wasn't true with RSS because it's just a format. But however, no one controlled that format, so what you ended up with was a dominant format that was then split into many different versions, which hurt the growth of web feed-related services. This cannot happen to Twitter. If Twitter ended tomorrow, you wouldn't have the new service be internally divided about, are we following the original purpose of Twitter? Twitter was actually not created was originally created for life blogging, which isn't how it, like RSS, it's not used for its original purpose. It's now largely used for links, etc., or just comments in general, not specifically the mundane life details. Like originally Twitter was supposed to be like, I'm having lunch right now. That was supposed to be the prototypical Twitter post originally. People found more useful use for it, and they switched to that. So with Twitter, if it ended, you'd just have to create alternative services, and they wouldn't be internally divided. Another advantage of centralization is that it limits how much your service can be disrupted by outsiders. So for example, people such as Ed Bot blame Google Reader. They say Google swept into a crowded field with Google Reader, killed almost all credible competition with a free product, and then killed its own product when it no longer had a use for it. And then goes on to argue that this actually set back the feed aggregator market by several years, because all the competitors had ended their services, and so people had to create new ones. Facebook and Twitter, however, have official clients, so it's much harder for someone to disrupt you from the outside. Lastly, centralization allows you to create a more user-friendly service, because all the feeds necessarily exist on a single database. So all the feeds on Twitter exist on Twitter's servers, whereas all the feeds used by Basscox, it can create its own database of the feeds it knows of, but not all feeds exist on its server. It does not know of all the web feeds that exist. So for example, on Twitter, I want to follow Luke Muehlhauser and get his updates. I just search Luke Muehlhauser, and I find him. On NewsBlur, which is a feed aggregator, I search Luke Muehlhauser. I don't find him, so I have to go to his website, go to his RSS link, and then add it. It's just a less user-friendly experience. So, in closing, centralization seems to be an inexorable process. People have attempted to create social media websites that aren't that are decentralized, and it hasn't worked out. And I do not know how you can prevent it, because centralization just has those benefits. So it provides more compliant service. As a result, though, Infocatch still works with most of those centralized services, and so even if the trend of centralization continues, we will still be able to get our content and use it in unexpected new ways, such as getting it on your